Hi everyone, welcome to our secondary brain anatomy webinar.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We're very excited to tell you all about the brain and its anatomy, all about the structure, different structures and functions that they may be more dominant in and things like that. We'll also be going into a couple case studies just to get us thinking, you know, kind of what happens when different areas of the brain are damaged, for example. We'll go on to our first question there, and then we'll have a bit more of an introduction after the question. So feel free to use Kahoot to have a go at answering this question. So the question is, what are the cells in the brain called? So in red, either synaptic cells, or blue, neurons, nerve cells, yellow, cerebral cells, or green, memory cells. So familiarize yourself with Kahoot. Hopefully you can use that to answer the question. Lovely. If anybody who's just joined, the game pin is in the chat, so please do use it there.
Yeah, great. We've got 29 answers so far, 30. Great.
Lovely. Yeah, so well done, everyone.
The answer. And yeah, as we said, write it down. If you don't have another device, that's completely fine. Just write your answer on a piece of paper, and then you can tot up your scores and see how you did at the end, how many you got right.
Lovely. So for each question, you will get 60 seconds to answer with a maximum of 1,000 points per question. So the faster you answer, the more points you get, really. So well done. Most of you got neurons, nerve cells. That's right. So now that we know how to use Kahoot, I will kind of introduce ourselves in this session a little bit more. So my name is Elena. I am a student working at the British Neuroscience Association this year, the BNA for short, and I've been doing lots of work like this, sort of making and delivering sessions to primary and secondary school children and sixth form college students to just increase your awareness about neuroscience, really. So that's the science of the brain and nervous system and how it all works. And I also work with Lydia.
Yeah, hi guys, my name is Lydia. I am usually a student at Southampton University, but for the past few months I've been working at the BNA with Elena and doing lots of outreach, various sessions in schools and universities, really engaging people about neuroscience in the brain, and I'm really excited about today. Yeah, so thanks for joining us.
Lovely. So after each question, we'll be getting a leaderboard. Here it is. Well done, guys. We've got in first place, we've got Tom. Oh, well done. Lovely stuff. Brain nerd William. Well done. This is all great stuff, guys. So I think we will now move on to another question for you, just to get us warmed up, and then we will learn a bit more about the anatomy of the brain.
Yeah, so with this question, we're asking how much of the total body energy does the brain use? So how much do you think of the energy that your body has goes into the brain and the brain functioning and doing all the jobs it needs to do? How much do you think? For red, that's 5 to 10% of total body energy, blue 15 to 20%, yellow 20 to 25, or green 30 to 35. So we've got 30 answers so far. Well done. People seem to be doing well with clicking answers.
Well done, guys. I think there is, there we go, everyone's answered. So the timer will sort of fast forward, go to the end if everybody has answered.
Yeah, great. So yeah, this was interesting. People thought different things with this one. So yeah, it's actually 20 to 25%. So it's not the highest one that we had on there, but it is quite a lot of the body's total energy. So the brain is a really hungry organ. It does use a lot of the body's energy for what it needs to do. And we're going to learn a bit more about what it does in lots of different ways. So we've got our leaderboard. Okay. Not much change, but we'll carry on seeing it.
Oh yeah, we've got a new person come in first place though. We've got Brain Nerd come in first place. Well done. New person on the leaderboard there, Emma. Well done, everyone. Cool, so let's get stuck into brain anatomy. So no need to use Kahoot for just a second now while I go through a few slides with you. So the brain, this is what a human brain looks like. Some of you may know that, some of you may not. To help us sort of think about what it looks like and the different parts, we kind of say that the brain looks a bit like a walnut because it's got these two sides. If you kind of put your fists together, that's approximately how big your own brain will be, and it's got these two sides to it, and they are called hemispheres. So the brain has two hemispheres, a right and a left hemisphere connected together. So they do work together, they are connected, but there are these two different halves. And then also similarly to a walnut, the brain has all these sort of wrinkles and ridges and all over its surface. And they're actually really important to increase the brain surface area. So if you were to sort of squash the brain down so it's flat, it would actually be as big as 4 pieces of A4 paper. And obviously that would not fit inside our heads. That's really, really big. So all these wrinkles help it to increase the surface area so it can fit in lots of information and loads of neurons, lots of brain cells. So we've got to these, so those wrinkles are formed of these two parts. So we say that there are these grooves called sulci and the ridges called gyri. So I will show you kind of explain that a little bit better here. So the ridges, we kind of say they're kind of like mountains. They are called gyri, or a singular, it's a gyrus. So that's one gyrus that you can see there. And then the sulcus are like valleys. So that's the bits that dip in. That's a sulcus or sulci, many of them. Lovely. So hopefully that's all okay with everybody. Again, if you've got any questions, please type that into the Q&A. So.
Great, so we've now got an open-ended question. So what side of the body does the left side of the brain control? And I know one of you will know the answer to this because you've typed that stuff into the chat earlier. So with this, you've got a box and you can type an answer in. So we just need left or right. You can just write left or right into that to see what you think, which side of the body you think the left side of the brain controls.
Yeah, so we're looking for just a side of the body, really. One word needed there. Yeah, we may have read that out earlier. They may have given it away, but your other device to answer with Kahoot. So I think we may be waiting for a couple more people. So yeah, if you don't know, have a good guess. Obviously, we're here to learn new things, hopefully. So no, if you don't know, well done.
Great. Yeah, so it was the right side of the body. So well done. Oh, so 24 of you got that right. So well done to those who got that right. So yeah, if we go on to the next slide, oh, we'll have the leaderboard. Oh, so we've got some change. Hide kids are moving up, and we've got the Girton gang as well moving up. And Brain Nerd is at the top. Great. So let's see if we can see if we can stay at the top for Brain Nerd.
Yeah, we've got 6 players here, answer streak of 3. That's brilliant. So you guys must be doing really well.
Yeah, really well done for your answers, guys. So, so we've got the slide here showing that the brain sends messages to the body, and as we talked about, the 2 hemispheres of the brain. So the brain sends messages to the opposite side of the body. So here is the right side of my brain, and the right side of my brain will send messages, for example, to my left hand to tell it to do different things. So the brain doesn't just send messages to the rest of the body, it also receives messages from the rest of the body. And again, this happens with opposites. So again, if something, if a message needed to travel from my left hand to the brain, it would travel to the right hemisphere of my brain from my left hand. And we're going to just think about how that might happen in reality. So say you were sitting out in the sun and a fly came and sat on your hand, you would feel that the fly is on your hand, and a message would be sent from your hand to your brain, and that's how you would know that the fly is on your hand. So say the fly sat on your left hand, the message would get sent to the right hemisphere of your brain. And now you feel the fly on your hand, and you might want to shake it off because you don't want that fly on your hand. And so then the right hemisphere of your brain sends a message all the way down your arm to your left hand, to the muscles in your left hand, to tell them to move so that you can shake the fly off your hand. So it's amazing that all these things happen. All these messages are sent to the rest of our body and from our body to our brain to enable us to do all the things that we can do.
Great. So actually somebody's just asked in the Q&A, Naomi said, why did it say my answer was wrong? I said the right side. So I apologise if Kahoot may have worked a bit weirdly for you. I'm really sorry about that if you did type in the correct answer and it said it was wrong. Sometimes if you maybe mistype it, or if you run out of time, if you kind of put in the answer a bit too late, sometimes it may say it's wrong. So I'm sorry about that. Hopefully you won't do that again, but I do apologise. So let's carry on. So we can look at the brain in a variety of ways. So we've said that the different hemispheres of the brain control the opposite side of the body, and that the brain looks a little bit like a walnut, all those wrinkles. So how do we know that the brain looks like that? Well, we can study it. Scientists and doctors and other people can look at it in a variety of ways. So we've got different types of brain scanning. You might have heard of MRI scan, of CT scans. We can also cut up brains and in slices, very thin slices, and actually look at it under a microscope to allow us to see very, very small structures that we can normally see just with our eyes. There we go. So again, and brain scanning as well can kind of show us what happens in real time sometimes as well, how different areas of the brain are activated if the person is doing different tasks or thinking about different things, which is really interesting. So let's think about, well, why is the brain important? Well, the brain is like a control center. It's so important in everything that you do and you say, and when you're thinking and remembering things, that is all your brain. And that's why the brain is so important, and it does so many things. Like Lydia was saying, if you touch something, that is your brain actually letting you know that you have touched something and what it feels like as well. So although obviously we've got these different parts of the brain that we are going to be talking about, and they are all very important and they all work together to bring about all these important functions that the brain does. But there are some specific brain parts which are more responsible or more dominant in particular functions. So let's have a look at what that might look like. So if we look at kind of gross brain structure here, we've got these different regions. So we've got the cerebrum, which is kind of, I've got a brain model here for you. The cerebrum is all of this part here, and it does very important things such as decision making. It allows you to, again, to know when you have felt something, what it feels like. It processes the visual information from the eyes and the auditory information about hearing from your ears, things like that. And then we've got to the brain stem, which is very important for regulating heartbeat and your breathing as well. So that's really very important for survival, really. All sorts of survival functions happen in the brainstem. And the cerebellum there, right at the back of the brain, just under here, that's very important for regulating movement. So as Lydia said, remember with movement and moving your arm, a lot of that voluntary movement happens in the cerebrum. But actually your cerebellum helps to regulate that movement and really improve your fine motor skills, such as sort of playing the piano. And also, if you've ever heard of sort of the term practice makes perfect, that's really your cerebellum that's helping out with that. So it's coordination, hand-eye coordination as well, and balance and posture that the cerebellum is really important for. Lovely, so we've got a question for you. So I've just talked about that, so hopefully you'll be able to know the answer of this one. But again, if you don't know, worries, just have a guess. And if you have only just joined, the game pin is at the bottom of the screen here. So do please try and join in Kahoot if you can. So have a go at answering that. Very important questions in the Q&A there, lovely. I will be answering those in just a few minutes and throughout. Lovely. Get everyone getting their answers in.
Yeah, really well done with doing the answers, guys. Hopefully that stuff has been going in. Great, so 26 of you got that one right. So as Elena was saying, the cerebellum regulates movement and coordination for those things like drawing or playing the piano or even sewing. It really helps you to get better at doing those things. And we're going to see a bit more about that in a bit.
So here is our leaderboard. Well done, everyone. Brain Nerd still in first place. I think you might have been in first place now for a while. So well done, that's absolutely brilliant. Oh wow, up 5 places, Tiger is the highest climber. That's brilliant, that means you've improved a lot in the last couple of questions. Nice. Cool, so we've got a bit of an activity for you. I'll let Lydia explain that while I have it here at the Q&A.
Yeah, so we're now going to do an activity that we call the mirror drawing activity. So hopefully you will have seen our page on our website for this webinar where we've been talking about the resources that you'll need for this activity. So if you have got them, that's great. So you will need a picture of a star like this. You will need a box, and I've got mine here. Yours will probably look a bit smaller than mine. But this is so that you can see what I'm doing. You'll need a mirror of some sort. It can be a small mirror like this, but the bigger the better really. And a pen, a marker pen to be drawing around your star. So with this activity, we're going to be able to see our cerebellum in action in a sense, as we learn to do something that is probably a new skill for a lot of us. We probably haven't done this before. So what you need to do is have your box. I'm just going to move my camera like this. So you should have your box and have your picture of a star and put that somehow in your box. Again, yours might look a little bit different to mine, but you need to put it in such a way that when you put your hand in the box, you can't see your hand with your eyes, but you can see your hand, the reflection of your hand in a mirror, which I've got in front of me. So why don't you get your stuff now? And what you need to do is just have a go at tracing that star with your marker pen, but make sure you don't look straight at your hand. With your eyes, you need to look at the reflection of your hand in the mirror. So I'm going to try and do my first one, hopefully as you guys are doing it. Yeah, we're going to have a go, and then once you've done one, you can do another one, and hopefully you'll see some improvement. But yeah, you can do as many tries as you want, as many stars as you have in the time we have. So I'm going to get started.
So while Lydia is having a go at the mirror drawing activity, so please do have a go at the same time. I'll also get stuck into some of these questions in the Q&A. So Katie Martin has asked, why is the brain in the head? Well, really, that's just a product of evolution, really. That's just how, as a species, and how many species, many different animals have formed, that the brain is in the head. It's also in the head because we've got our skull, which is really, really important protection for our brain. So the brain is very delicate, very fragile, a bit squishy, so it really, really needs to be protected. And the skull is a really, really good, hard protective layer for the brain. So that's why it's in our heads, really. I hope that answers your question. And then, why do we get headaches? Asked by William. Well, that could be due to a lot of different things. So there are lots of different types of headaches, and really it depends. Oh, why is the task so difficult? Yeah, actually, it is really difficult. It's a lot more difficult than you think it is. So again, we will go into that. I'll finish answering the headache question. So don't worry if you find it difficult. I found it so difficult when I first did this task. So keep trying. So that's why we get you to do it more than once, see if maybe there's any change. So headaches. So there are lots of different headaches that could be caused by lots of different things. But really it's that because we've got lots of different blood vessels in our brain. So just like we've got blood vessels, you might cut yourself, cut your finger and it might bleed. Just like we've got these blood vessels everywhere else, we've also got them in our brain and surrounding our brain to provide our brain with the energy and blood supply that it needs. And there are actually these, what's a good way to explain these? There are all these nerves inside the blood vessels which send pain messages to the brain, to those centers in the brain that make sense of how we're feeling and pain, really, whichever process pain. So there are all these nerves and pain receptors in the blood vessels that help us to detect this. But again, there are lots of different causes for different headaches. So that's quite a complex topic there, which is really important and lots of scientists are researching into. So I hope that answers your question. Let's see.
So I'm on my second try now. I don't know how many you've done. So it is a lot harder than it looks, because we aren't used to seeing things in a mirror and having to draw them. It's just a very difficult skill.
Yeah, so we've had someone ask, why does the left brain control the right side of the body? So we like to think of them as the two hemispheres, so it all is one brain. It's not really the left and right brain, but we've got the left and right hemisphere. And so, for example, the left side of the brain, the left hemisphere, controls the right side of the body, because all these nerves that are going from your brain and brainstem and spinal cord to these different parts of the body, these nerves actually cross over in the spinal cord when they go up to the brain. So, for example, a nerve that's going from my right hand will go down my arm, well, up my arm, even like this. And when it gets to the spinal cord, instead of going up to the right side of the brain, that nerve actually crosses over to the left side of the spinal cord and goes up to the left hemisphere, the left part of the brain. And then that's why this left part of the brain controls it. So that nerve coming down also goes down to this arm, and nerves coming down here go down to that arm or to this leg, and vice versa. So we don't actually really know why we are made like this, why we've evolved like this, but that's why it happens, because all of this sort of crossing over in the spinal cord. So hopefully that answers your question. Lovely. What else is there? Lovely. How is the task so difficult? So again, we will explain after you've done it, kind of what that's got to do with different parts of the brain and why it was so difficult. So we're going to have everybody try it out first, and then we'll all explain. Lovely. What else is there? So there's a question is, why does the brain have two parts? We could be different answers to these. As scientists, we are trying to find out answers to new things and researching things all of the time. We don't have all of the answers, unfortunately, but some people think that we've got these two parts of the brain so that the brain can do lots of things at the same time, so that we can do lots of things at the same time, but also it could be due to that after injury, our brain can recover more easily. So if there's an area of the brain that is damaged, then another part of the brain can sort of compensate for that area and regain kind of the lost function because of that damaged area of the brain. So again, kind of lots of different answers, but very interesting question, very good question. Nice, well done everyone. Someone's keeping it so hard in the chat, it is really hard. And oh, my sibling is older, we'll do that one in a minute. I think there was a question. There is a question in the chat that says, does a big brain mean you are clever? A big brain doesn't mean you are clever, no. There's no correlation between size and how clever you are. So it doesn't mean that because you've got a bigger brain, it's heavier, let's say, you're smarter than someone else his brain isn't as heavier as you. No, that's not really linked. But again, very, very cool question. Very interesting things to think about. Cool. Oh, lots of interesting questions. Well done, everyone.
Right, I think I've just about finished my 3. So I wonder how you guys are getting on. I know we've had several people say it's harder than it looks. It really is. It isn't an easy task at all. So I think this was my first one, and then this was my second, and this was my third.
Lovely.
So a bit of improvement there, I think.
Yeah,
but
so yours look a bit neater, don't they, as you go on?
Yeah, so I have done this task before actually, so in a sense it's not really fair me doing it, but hopefully it helped you to see a little bit of how it could be done. But yeah, we've been it is a task that probably few of us have done before, so it is hard, and our brain has to really learn how to do it as we go along.
Yeah, so we've got a question here saying, my sibling is older than me and has done better at the task. Is there any reason why? So your age shouldn't really, everyone is different from each other. Your age doesn't really matter too much, but everyone is different. Everyone is slightly different in terms of their brain and behavior and body. And actually, if you're a bit older, you might be a bit better at it just because you've had a lot more experience. With doing different things, just in general, just a lot more life experience. That might be why. That might be why sibling is a bit better. So I hope you've all had a go at that. We've got a poll for you.
So the question here is just, did you improve over time? It would just be interesting to see. So in red, you improved a lot. Blue, improved slightly. Yellow, no. Or green, it got worse. Hopefully no one got worse. But if you did, don't worry.
Yeah, again, this actually isn't for points. This is just kind of out of interest, so we all know kind of how each other did in this task, really, and we'll explain kind of why we did it as well.
Don't worry too much if you didn't improve.
No, it really doesn't matter.
In a short space of time. I think sometimes you maybe need to wait a little bit and then try it again. Sometimes our brain seems to need a little bit of time to then be able to improve a lot. So we've got 31 answers.
Please do also send us photos of your stars, your 3 stars or your 2 stars, all next to each other. We'd love to see them. We can put them up on the website, or as you're trying out the activity, if you're still going, get somebody to take a photo of you doing it. It doesn't have to have your face in it if you don't like, but it would be great if we could have photos of you doing that. We'd love to see them. We'd love to see you having a go, and we'd love to see your stars to see if there was any change.
Yeah.
Done, everyone.
Yeah, so 45% of you improved slightly.
Slightly. Great, perfect. That's kind of what we would have expected, really. So if I just go next, and we can have a good chat about that.
Yeah, so these are the stars of drawn by some people in a session that we did before. So you can see how the star has improved over time, and as I say, sometimes people are fairly quick at improving. Sometimes people need a bit longer. I know when Elena did this, she needed a little bit longer, but then she improved a lot. So we're all different.
Mine was really weird actually, because all of my 3 looked like the first one. Worse, actually, way worse than the first one. So I was starting to get a little bit worried. But yeah, again, then I waited 10 minutes and thought I might as well give it another go. And I managed to do one that was almost absolutely on the line. So again, everybody's brains and everybody's bodies, just, you know, as people, we're all different.
Yeah, and so with this activity, we talked before about the cerebellum, that means little brain in Latin, and how it is so important in our movement, in training us and helping us to get better at things. So we really saw that in action. Yeah, and we're now going to look at some case studies, I think. First we're going to look at the lobes of the brain, and then we're going to look at some case studies.
Yeah, so we'll learn sort of about the lobes first, which will help us to make sense of those case studies a little bit more. Cool, so I'll tell you about the lobes of the brain. So we talked about the cerebrum, this bit of the brain here. and how that's got all those wrinkles. So it performs lots of different functions and actually is split into these 4 regions, 4 sections that we call brain lobes. So you've got this frontal lobe at the front of the brain here, and that's very important for things like personality, your identity, and also important functions like decision making and analysing, and also very importantly movement, voluntary movement. So when you're moving your arm, moving your leg, that's that parts of the brain that is controlling that really. So next, we've got the parietal lobe, kind of next to the frontal lobe here, but further to the back, more in the middle of the brain here. And that's got, again, very lots of different functions, but the one that we'll be focusing on today is sensation. So it's actually got a part of it called the somatosensory cortex. And it's an area that allows you, again, as Lydia was explaining earlier, allows you to feel things, to know when you are touching things, when something touches you. Firstly, which parts of your body did it touch or did you touch? And if you feel any pain, or if it's hot or cold, or the texture, if it's rough or smooth, that's that area of the brain that processes all this information and lets you know what it's like. So we've got the occipital lobe next, right at the back of the brain, and that's all for vision. So your eyes will send information about what you're seeing to the back of the brain, to the occipital lobe, and that's the area of the brain that will kind of make sense of this, and so that you know what you're seeing really. So this is visual processing, so processing visual information from the eyes. And then the temporal lobe, lastly, either side here, kind of behind the ear, so that could help you think about what it does, is that it's got all these auditory centres. So hearing centres really. So the ears will send all this information about hearing to the temporal lobe, and the temporal lobe will then help you make sense of what you're hearing. And the temporal lobe also has important memory and learning centres as well. So we'll explain a little bit about that later. Well done everyone for answering our questions and on Kahoot, and also for submitting such interesting questions in the Q&A. Lovely, so I think we will move on, and we've got a question for you about something that I've just been talking about. So here it is. So when you touch something, which lobe processes this information? So grab your other device, maybe your phone or an iPad. But again, if you can't do this, just write down your answer. That's also perfectly fine if you're not able to use Kahoot. So well done, everyone getting in their answers.
Yeah, you're very quick at answering the questions. We're very impressed. So red for occipital lobe, blue for temporal lobe, green, yellow for parietal lobe, and the green is for the frontal lobe. So which do you think processes information from when you touch something? So when you can feel what it feels like, if it's rough or smooth, which area of the brain is involved in processing that? But yeah, great, really quick answering, guys.
So we've got a really interesting question here in the Q&A. Oh, sorry, and then we'll kind of go on to this. So we've got an interesting question, which is, does anything in your brain affect how clever you are? So really the term, cleverness, that's really kind of can be defined in many different ways, and different people can be clever at doing different things. You can be clever at, that could mean you could be really good at something. So you could be really good at maths, could be very good at dancing, at singing, at writing. You might be a very talented writer. You might want to write a book. You may be very good at really different things. So that really depends on how we think about the word clever. But actually, how clever you are, good at things you are, really is all about a combination of your genes that you inherited from your family, from your parents, and also your environment. So your environment that you grow up in, say your relationships and experiences growing up and throughout your life, and your genes kind of interact together for this cleverness to come about, really. So I hope that answers your question. So it's all about your genes and your experiences that affect how clever you are or how good you are at doing different things.
And well done to 19 of you who got that right. So it was the parietal lobe that processes the information from when you touch things. So well done if you got that one right. Great. Oh,
Still in first place. Brilliant. Well done. Hi kids, Gerds and Gang. We've just got a skull there. And Sets, is that how you pronounce it? That I think. Well done. Well done, everyone. 7 players just hit answer streak of 3. Absolutely brilliant. So well done, everyone.
So we're going to look at another part of the brain now, and we've been learning about the lobes of the brain and really thinking about what we can see when we look at the brain from outside, if you remember when Elena had that brain model. But now we also have internal structures in our brain. So these are bits of the brain that are kind of on the inside that we wouldn't be able to see from looking at the brain from the outside. And one of these is the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is actually part of the temporal lobe. So if you remember when we were learning about lobes, the hippocampus is part of that lobe. And in the temporal lobe, there are these areas that are really important for memory and learning. If you remember on that, that image of the brain and all the different parts, the different lobes and what they do, the temporal lobe has these areas that are really important for memory and learning. And the hippocampus is one of these that is really important for this. So now we're going to look at some case studies. So with case studies, these are really things that have happened to people in the past, often really, really long ago, that have helped us learn about the brain. And sometimes they're really awful things that happen to people, accidents, and yeah, really bad things that happen to people. But actually they've enabled scientists to learn more about what the brain does. So one of these that we're going to look at is a guy called Patient HM. So his name was actually Henry Molaison, but they called him Patient HM while he was still alive, so that he had some privacy, basically. And he was a man who, as he was growing up, had really bad epilepsy. So maybe you guys know someone who has epilepsy, or you've just heard of it, but people with epilepsy often have seizures, which are really horrible. And Henry had lots of seizures when he was growing up, and they were so bad that he couldn't get a job, and his life was really affected in a really bad way. And so there was a neurosurgeon at the time who did an operation on Henry, and this wouldn't happen today, absolutely not, and it was really bad that it happened then. But what the surgeon did was to remove Henry's hippocampus. So he actually took out this part of Henry's brain in the hope that it would solve Henry's epilepsy. And it did. Henry did recover from the operation, and he didn't have any more seizures, but it did have a really big impact on him. And we're going to think about that, but before I actually tell you what happened, we've got a question for you. So thinking about what we've been talking about, oh, I will just explain, sorry. So when Henry he had a really bad impact on his life, and the impact was, you can listen to me before answering the question, I think we'll have some time, so if you don't know what it is, don't try and answer before. So what happened was basically he couldn't form any new memories because of this part of the brain, the hippocampus, that's so important in memory formation, had been taken out. Every day was like a new life to him. He couldn't remember the day before, and he just woke up and it was a whole new day. And he performed the star drawing task that we've just done. So the question is, what do you think happened in this task when he did it? So sorry if you answered before I told you the information. Sorry about that.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. But have a go.
Do have a go. Great. So 13 of you got that right. So well done. And yeah, sorry if you clicked an answer before I'd really explained. But what happened when he performed this task was that he did improve over time, but he couldn't actually remember that he'd ever done it before. So when scientists discovered that Henry had this problem, that he couldn't make any new memories, that he just would wake up and he couldn't remember what happened the day before or even years before. All he could remember were his childhood years. There was a scientist, a lady, who studied him and did loads of these tasks that we've just done, the mirror drawing task. So this actually became quite famous as an activity, the one that you've just done, drawing around that star in the mirror, because it's really hard, and it was really interesting to see that he actually improved over time, because you might think, oh, if he couldn't remember having done it before, surely he wouldn't improve. But what we saw, or what we've learned, was that because Henry still had his cerebellum, that part of the brain that we learned is so important in helping us get better at things, as you can see, Elena's showing it, because that was still intact, he was actually able to get better at drawing, even though he couldn't remember having drawn it before, and he would every time say, oh, this is going to be hard, this is interesting, thinking he'd never ever done it before. So it really helped scientists to learn. They thought at the time that memory was just spread over the whole of the brain, and actually they learnt that the cerebellum is really important in helping us to learn how to do new things better. So well done for that.
Our leaderboard. Brain nerd still on top. Oh, we just hit answer streak of 3. Lovely. We've got Kathy coming on the leaderboard as well. Well done, everyone. So before we move on to another case study, I'm going to answer some questions. Susan asks, how do we feel temperature? So again, if you remember, I talked a bit about receptors and that they help us feel pain. Well, we also have these receptors, these things on our skin and internally that help us feel, not just pain, but there are different ones that help us feel temperature. So they are on our skin and internally as well, and when they detect something that's hot or cold, they send messages up to our brain, to that area that processes this type of information, and that's how we make sense of that. That's how we then know whether that's hot or cold, because of these receptors. So that's how we feel temperature. Why do they have such complex names? And that is because really, that's all part of history, really. So when things were first discovered by scientists, by doctors, other people with different parts of the brain were sort of first seen or discovered, or their functions were first discovered, they were mostly sort of given these Greek or Latin names, because those are the languages kind of used in science at the time. Or sometimes they are given these names after the people they found them. So there's actually this area in the brain that processes speech, called Broca's area, and Paul Broca was actually the gentleman that first found sort of what that area does, because of the patient he was working with. So that's why they have such complex names. What does your brain do when you hear another language? Again, such an interesting question. So really, it depends. If you know that other language that you've heard, if you know, if you can speak it or you understand it or whatever, it's very different. So if you don't know what the language is, if it's just a language you haven't heard before, or you've heard before and you just, you don't know that language, that information is just processed by your auditory centers, here in the temporal lobe at the sides of your head. So what that means is that your brain processes it as just sound. Your brain doesn't know what it means, it can't make sense of it, so it just sounds like just different sounds to you. But actually, if you hear a language that you do know, then that's when all these areas in the brain that are specific for speech and language get involved as well. So for example, if we were to look at someone's brain when they heard a language that they do know, you'd get all these active speech and language areas of the brain also become active, because those words have meaning. You know what those words mean. Whereas if you didn't, it would just be your auditory centers that were sort of processing the information in your brain. So I hope that answers your question. That's what happens when you hear another language. Why is the hippocampus named after a mythical horse/fish? So the hippocampus has the name hippocampus because actually the shape of it inside your brain looks a bit like a seahorse. Yeah, that might be a bit funny. You might want to give that a Google. Hippocampus, what does it look like in the brain? It looks like a seahorse, and it's got this kind of curl like a seahorse tail has. So it's named hippocampus because of its shape, really, that's why. So hope that answered your question. So well done, everyone. Thank you very much for sending in all of your questions. I will answer some a bit later. So let's have a look at another case study. And this is Phineas Gage. Actually, let's pause that for now. So we'll be looking at a case study. So Phineas Gage was an American railroad construction worker. So he was involved in blasting rock. This was many years ago. I believe it was the 1800s. He was involved in blasting rock so that they could put down railroad tracks. And actually, there was a really kind of he was involved in quite a tragic accident. So we're going to watch this trailer for a short film that was made about him. And
to check whether we've got the sound on to make sure we can all hear the sound.
Can everybody hear that? Let me know in the chat if you can't hear. There we go, that should work. I have shared my computer sound. Can everyone hear that? It's a bit laggy, no. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, people can't hear it, it sounds like. Maybe we can watch it on YouTube. Right, well, my sound is on, can't hear. All right, that's fine, no worries. It was just a 30-minute video. Can hear it faintly, some people say. I'm not sure why that is, but not to worry. Maybe if we play it again. But actually it ends with, it just shows him in this accident where he had this metal rod, this giant metal rod that actually went up, was blasted up and through his right cheek and came up and out through his the top of his right hemisphere, his frontal lobe up here. So that was the accident he was involved in, and he survived. So here he is, that's Phineas Gage, with the rod that went through his cheek and out the top of his brain. So that went completely through his brain. And then you can see it in the image as well, how that would have looked like through his brain as well. Yeah, I can perhaps send you the link to the video afterwards. You'll be getting some sort of post-webinar emails from us, just with some other activities you could be doing after this webinar. So I could add in the link in there if you couldn't hear. Again, apologise about that. But yes, this is what it looks like. That is the one giant metal rod that he's holding. That's the one that went through his brain. So this metal rod went through his right hemisphere, and actually it was through his frontal lobe. So I've got a question for you, and it is, remembering when we talked about the lobes, if it went through his frontal lobe, what do you think were the consequences of this? So what do you think were the consequences after this frontal lobe damage? What would have happened to him? What would it have been like? So I can tell you that he did survive, but what do you think would have happened to him in terms of, how he was affected everyday life? Yeah, all your answers coming in, lovely. Well done, everyone. Again, do write it down if you can't use Kahoot, that doesn't matter really, that's absolutely fine. Answers coming in. So do you think it's memory loss, hearing loss, changes in personality and behaviour, loss of speech and language? Lovely, so most of people said changes in personality and behaviour, absolutely right. So remember, it's the frontal lobe that's important for decision-making, personality, identity, behaviour, movement. So yes, so because of that, it's actually quite a weird story. It's quite a weird thing to think about, that actually he was fine, he survived, not much changed. Obviously he lost vision in his right eye, but actually the only sort of really noticeable thing that changed about him, he led on to go to live an almost normal life after that. The things that did change were his personality and behaviour. So actually he was described by people as this really nice, loving, caring guy, before the accident, and after the accident he became kind of very, very rude and had this bad temper and just wasn't a nice person anymore, which is because we think of this frontal lobe damage. And actually this led into a lot of research into the brain and the different areas of the brain and their functions. So these obviously historical case studies are very important in our understanding. Cool, so here is our leaderboard. Lovely, I'm just having a quick look at the questions. So we might have some time. To answer a few more of those. But if we don't, I'm sorry about that, but you can email us the questions and we can have a go at answering them through email. So I'm going to send you mine and Lydia's emails. There we go. So you can email us your questions. And also, if you've got any photos of you doing the mirror drawing task or of your stars afterwards, please do email those to us as well. We'd love to, well, with your permission, of course, put them up on the website or on the VNA social media so other people can see what we've been doing today. But yeah, well done for having a go. Cool. So we've got some questions to kind of end the session on, see how much you've learned today. And then we'll have a final scoreboard to see who came in first, second and third place as well.
Great. So, which of the following parts of the brain consists of the frontal, parietal, temporal and occipital lobes? So in red, the cerebellum, in blue, the cerebrum, in yellow, the hippocampus, or in green, the brainstem. So which part of the brain do you think contains these 4 lobes? Is that we can see it from the outside, if we're looking at the brain from the outside. So that's a little bit of a clue. Maybe you remember from that diagram that we put up with the different parts of the brain. So if you can remember what that is.
Well done everyone, getting your answers. And after this question, I will answer some Q&As, some questions you've got in Q&A.
Yeah, well done. So hopefully you're learning lots about different parts of the brain, and maybe if you had a younger sibling that was here last time, or if you were here last time, you've got your brain hat. Oh, great. So 12 of you got that one right. Well done. So it was the cerebrum that we can see from the outside of the brain, and we can see all the wrinkles that Elena talked about being so important to have a bigger surface area, and yeah, just so many important things go on. So yeah, the other 3 parts of the brain we did discuss, but it's the cerebrum that contains the 4 lobes.
Oh, so actually, well, I'll show you the scoreboard.
Oh,
Hyde Kid's coming in first place. Wow. And then Kathy's second place, Brain Nerd. And then we've got the skull and the flower as well after that. Well done, everyone. So somebody asked in the Q&A, what bones did he break? So I'm assuming that's about Phineas Gage. Obviously, I should have mentioned really, because this rod went in through his cheek, he broke his jawbone, and it did come out at the top of his head. So his skull did break as well, and he also lost some teeth. So yes, he did unfortunately also break bones. What else? We've got loads and loads of interesting questions, guys. Well done. So we won't have time to probably answer all. How many parts of the brain are there? That's again an interesting thing to think about. There are lots of different parts of the brain. We've shown you some of the sort of parts of the brain that you can see by just looking at the brain as it is. Lydia's told you about the hippocampus, one of the internal structures. So there are very, very many different parts of the brain. I've got my brain model here. If I kind of open it up, I mean, there are loads of many more that you probably can't see on the inside, but that's kind of the inside sort of the brain cut in half there. The brain has lots and lots of internal structures, lots of many structures. I don't have a number for you, but there are lots of different parts that all work together to bring about different functions. So again, very interesting thing to think about. Yeah,
we've got another question. Someone asked, how did the doctors know that removing patient HM's hippocampus would help his seizures? And they didn't know for sure that removing his hippocampus would stop his seizures. So it was an experimental procedure. They were trying something out, really. And nowadays, we wouldn't do this. We wouldn't do an operation when we weren't completely sure what would happen. So that was many years ago, when doctors sadly did things very differently to now. So they did know that seizures were caused by something wrong in the brain, and they did just hope that it would help. So they really weren't sure. But if patient HM was alive now, we have lots of really great brain imaging tools. So we mentioned about the brain scanners at the start, like MRI machines. And so we would be able to scan his brain, and doctors would be able to identify which bits we would need to remove, or what treatment he should have. So we're able to have a much better understanding of the brain and what's wrong in disease because of these new technologies we have that help us to understand about the brain. So great question.
Thank you, Lydia, and thank you for your interesting questions, of course. And well done to William as well. He's the highest climber at the moment, up 4 places. So we've got a couple more questions for you to tie up this session. So what are the 2 sides of the brain called? That should be quite an, well, hopefully an easy one. If it's not, don't worry, again, just have a go. We talked about that, we talked about this at the beginning of the session, quite close to the beginning. So don't worry if you don't remember.
Yeah, so we talked about having 2 sides to the brain, and we talked about messages being sent from the brain to the body and from the body to the brain. So can we remember what they are called? Maybe doing this will help. So great, we've got 28 answers so far.
Yeah, well done everyone. If you're still, yeah, those of you that haven't answered yet, just take a guess. If it's wrong, it doesn't matter. Just have a think and take a guess. That's fine. Got a few more seconds. We'll wait for you. Oh, perfect. Everybody's answered. So that's right. Most of you said it is hemispheres. The 2 sides of the brain are called hemispheres. Remember, as we said, we've got the 2 fists together, kind of like our brain, the 2 hemispheres connected together, and they are called hemispheres. Somebody also said gyri or lateral. So no, they're not called laterals, and the gyri are the mountains, the kind of the ridges. So when we've got those wrinkles, a bumpy part that kind of bumps up, that's called a gyrus or gyri, plural, or we've got the sulcus, the bit that goes inside as well.
Yeah, well done. So 28 of you, that's great.
Yeah, so I think that was yeah, that's really fine. So that's our last question. So we will have a final leaderboard at the end, but first Lydia will just go for a summary of what we've learned today. So again, there is a final leaderboard that will tell us sort of who came first, second and third place. Well done to everyone, you're all doing so great.
Great, so our summary of what we've learned today. So we talked about the fact that the brain is a bit like a control center, and the fact that it sends messages to the body, receives messages from the body, and controls so many different things, speech and language and movement and loads else, loads of other things. And it has these 2 sides called hemispheres. So we've talked about the fact that the brain sends and receives messages to and from the opposite side of the body. And well done to whoever it was who typed that in right in the start in the chat. You were on it from the start. And we've talked about the outer regions of the brain, including the cerebrum, the cerebellum and the brainstem. And remember about the brainstem being so important in controlling things like heart rate and our breathing that keep us alive. About the 4 lobes, the parietal, frontal, temporal and occipital lobes. And we talked about patient HM and Phineas Gage. So hopefully you learnt a bit from those case studies. And finally, we talked about the hippocampus and how that's so important for memory storage and formation, how we saw such an impact of that being removed in patient HM. So really well done for today and for learning all of those different things.
Well done, everybody. I will answer a couple more questions. I think we've got time for that. Someone asks, which part of the brain does slow, fast thinking / decision making? So actually our brain and all our nerves send messages very, very, very quickly. The whole of our brain operates very, very fast. Now, the frontal lobe is all about those higher order functions, so things like decision making and analysing. That's more your frontal lobe. So again, there aren't really any slow and fast parts of the brain. It all operates very fast. But there are certain parts. If you think of fight or flight response, there are some parts of the brain that are involved in that sort of more instinctive behaviour, like the amygdala and other internal structures of the brain. So I hope that answers your question, and I think there are some more questions in here. Wow, lots and lots of questions. What happens to the brain during an epileptic seizure? So that's really interesting, actually. So in our brain, you might or might not know, our brain is made of neurons, as we established at the beginning here with our first question. And these neurons send messages to each other. These brain cells send messages to each other. That's how our brain works, to do all these different functions. And actually, during epilepsy, there is extra firing. So when we say firing, that's the one cell sending a message to another cell. So when somebody's having a seizure, there is a lot of prolonged and extra firing than there usually is. So there's a lot of electrical activity, we like to say, because brain cells send electrical signals. So there's a lot more electrical activity, and that's how a seizure happens. Lovely. So I think that is our last question for today, but thank you very much for sending. Oh, you doing any more of these sessions? It was really fun. I hope to come to another one. Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who attended. So we've got our final leaderboard, the podium, if you like. In third place, Brain Nerd, well done. We've got in second place, we've got 10863. And in first place, 11454. Well done. Oh, with the points, we've got Kathy and Hyde kids. Well done.
Yes, well done. Woo! Well done to the Hyde kids for winning.
Wow, well done. Well done to our winners, Hyde kids, and Kathy and Brainerd as well, and to everybody else that joined today. Absolutely amazing. Well done. Don't forget to send us your photos. We've put our emails in the chat. We'd love to see them of your stars or of you doing the mirror drawing activity. That would be wonderful.
Thank you so much for joining us. We just loved telling you about the brain and answering your questions and having lots of fun with you guys. So hopefully see you again soon. That's goodbye from me.
Thank you very much, everyone. So that's a goodbye from me as well. We hope to see you again soon, and thank you for joining us today. Bye.